So welcome all. We are very excited to be able to present to you a workshop on the shifting expectations and meeting the challenges of today's employers. My name is Lauren Frary, and I'm the Director of Strategic Business Transformation here at Saks. And I am joined by my colleague, Dustin.
Hi everyone, my name is Dustin Starling. I'm Director of Strategic Alliances at Trinet, and we get to work with a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, and I get to work with a lot of great people here at Saks. And if I had to boil down Trinet into three things, we really help transfer liability for a lot of our business owners. We help them kind of control costs, but we also help them really focus on attaining and attracting top talent in today's market. And so really excited about talking about this topic today because it's very near and dear to my heart, and I know a lot of you are going through the same struggle right now. So thanks, Lauren.
You're welcome. And just a little bit about what I'm doing here at Saks. This is a new role, and I'm providing strategic business transformation in the form of consulting for nonprofits and for small and mid-sized businesses. So whatever your pain point is, we have a solution for it, and it rounds out Saks' already robust offerings of tax and audit, advisory, IT consulting, HR consulting, wealth advisors. But now we have added consulting around boards and governance, fundraising, succession planning, risk assessments, strategic planning, assessments, and again, anything that would be a pain point for an organization. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. So what are the challenges that many of our employers are facing? We've all heard this before. There's an increased regulatory and compliance landscape, and many of these regulations are actually unfunded mandate. So although you may need to expend more resources to meet your compliance needs, those resources aren't coming very easily. There's also competition for talent amongst growing need for services. And the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits has reported this year that the need for services in the nonprofit sector is currently outpacing organizational capacity. And then the capacity to change business practice to keep up with the current trends. Nonprofits and small businesses need to be nimble enough to pivot based on the community's needs. Here's an example. When we talk about homeless services, in the beginning, homeless services were designed to provide transitional housing, a place for someone to go until they got their feet on the ground. And then later, they added workforce training to make sure that people had gainful employment so that they can live on their own and afford to live on their own. And then they added the need for mental health supports because we know that many of our folks who are homeless are also experiencing significant mental health challenges. So if the homeless services didn't pivot as these needs changed, then they found themselves in a position where they were obsolete.
Yeah, so that first bullet there, the increased regulatory and compliance landscape, I think it's really important to just take a step back and like I know that a lot of the changes, it seems like they happen overnight. And I think when you look at the legislative landscape, I think for 2021, 2022, about an average of 5 federal changes that directly affected the workforce. So not only is your job getting more difficult to keep up with all the changing rules and regulations, it's also getting a lot more costly if we don't, right? So if I look at 2021, $3.62 billion paid out in class action lawsuits. Now that was class action lawsuits that directly affected the workforce. Right now, in comparison, you look at 2019 and 2020 combined, just short of $3 billion. So we see this tick increasing in 2021, also increased in 2022. And where it looks at in 2022, again, these are things that directly affect the workforce and employees and employer relationships. Civil rights infringements increased by 151%, right? Privacy, data breaches, employment discrimination all increased. And unfortunately, the overall success rate for a class action lawsuit in 2022 was about 75%. So your job's getting more difficult, especially as we saw businesses go multi-state overnight. So now I'm not worrying about New Jersey. Now I'm worrying about New Jersey, but also North Carolina and California and Florida and all the other states that your employees move to. I asked the question to a lot of our clients, and how do you keep up with the labor laws changes in Kentucky and South Dakota? And the answer is you don't. It's impossible, right? So just want to put that out there. I mean, we understand that your job's getting more difficult. That's why Lauren and her team are here to really support you along the way. But there is some costly effects if we don't, right? Some other things that are coming out in New Jersey City. So I think New York City kind of led the charge here for pay transparency rules. California is quickly following suit. If you have any employees in Jersey City, whether it's a digital or print media, if you're posting jobs, you have to post a min-max salary and including benefits on there. In New York City, if you have 4 more employees, not in New York City, but 4 more employees across the country, and you post a job in New York City, again, digital or print, if you don't comply with these new pay transparency rules, potential $125,000 fine. So again, the cost for these things is going up, and I do expect the state of New Jersey and other states, we may have employees that follow suit. Paid family leave changes in New York, but also New Jersey, expanding to not just call it the core nucleus family, but now expanding out to step brothers and step cousins and whatever. So that's being out there. I'd also just kind of point out there's a lot of whispers in legislation that's potentially coming down around surveillance technology. As we all went, remote in the past year or two, a lot of companies thought it'd be a good idea to put some technology on it just to make sure that Dustin's actually doing his work, right? That has led to, again, those privacy increases, the civil rights increases with the class action lawsuits last year. So we do feel like there'll be legislation coming down the pipe for that, including what they're calling a blueprint for AI Bill of Rights, so to speak. And then you factor in all those things with the SEC coming down with human capital reporting, SEC, DE&I. And so a lot of these things are changing the landscape of how you're going to run your business and just the expertise that you have to quickly become experts in. So yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot. I'm overwhelmed now.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the national trends around the talent shortage that we're experiencing. So currently, 44% of CEOs report that they want their employees back in the office. Obviously, post-pandemic, a lot of people had the opportunity to work from home and kind of settled in and are enjoying it. And CEOs are they hesitate to mandate returning back to the office due to the tight labor market. And they're really concerned about if they mandate it, how many employees will they actually lose? And 60% of employees noted that they would look for another job if they could no longer work remotely. Prudential had a 2022 study which noted that 1/3 of job switchers chose flexibility over pay. And I think that that's significant, again, especially in the nonprofit sector where historically salaries tend to be a little bit lower than other sectors. The other thing that's been noted is employees are expecting more from employers, especially in the area of flexibility, fair wages, and benefits. And I think that that is something that now we really need to tune into and listen to. So some national trends specifically in the nonprofit sector. According to the National Council of Nonprofits in March of this year, workforce shortages is the #1 concern of nonprofits. What was once considered a challenge is now risen to the level of a crisis. 26.2% of nonprofits reported vacancy rates of 20 to 29%. And it certainly reduces our capacity to serve our communities. Ultimately, it also reduces the quality of life for the many, many people who depend on nonprofit services and supports. And Dustin and I were just talking about the fact that in New Jersey, nonprofits make up 1/3 of all employees in the state. It is a significant amount. And everybody at some point in their life is going to be affected by or touched by a nonprofit. So we really want to make sure that we are supporting nonprofits and keeping them vital. There's also another kind of nonprofit thing that I always like to talk about. There's this age-old debate about, if I have some money for my HR department, do I spend it on recruiting or do I spend it on retention, right? And I would say, and we're going to talk about in a little bit, the value of retaining your current employees and the return on your investment when you retain them, but also the cost of employee turnover. So those are some national trends. Let's talk a little bit about some of the trends in New Jersey. Again, love working with the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits. If you're not aware of them, please go to their website. They are the resource hub for all nonprofits in New Jersey. And they have many, many resources, many of them which are free. So according to the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits, we are experiencing, of course, a significant workforce shortage. In New Jersey, the average vacancy rate is 21%.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at those numbers, again, we fully understand now, anecdotally, as I'm dealing with conversations with clients, I hear a lot about, it's not just I'm not getting enough applicants to the job. It's not just the quantity, but it's also the quality, right? The people that are applying to these jobs are maybe not the right caliber, maybe that's the wrong terminology, but they're just not quite what I'm looking for. So when you look at that number, that's 20% the vacancy rate, the problem also is the backfill of filling that talent just isn't there, both in numbers and caliber that we're looking for. And that's just kind of a self-defeating circle that it just kind of gets worse and worse. So.
Right. There's also the need to incorporate DEIB in your organizations. Many nonprofits are actually now facing funders and grantors who are demanding to see the DEIB statistics on a nonprofit before they will consider them for a grant. So it's really important. And again, this is, although not a mandate, it certainly is an unfunded initiative that nonprofits really need to look into and consider when they're hiring. There's also some financial uncertainty, certainly making it difficult to offer competitive compensation.
Yeah, Lauren, this is something that I kind of coined. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere by somebody much smarter than me, but they call it like the loyalty tax, right? And there a lot of times businesses will kind of tout like, hey, we're giving a 3, 4, or 5% increase this year. You're welcome. But when you look at the employees who have switched, again, to Lauren's point earlier, a third of job switchers in the past 2 years actually took a pay decrease. But when you look at the data for those job switchers who did switch, average anywhere between a 10 to 30% pay increase. And so when I'm looking at compensation, especially in the nonprofit space, a lot of your employees may be driven by the mission and the goals of your organization, and that's great because frankly the communities need the things you guys are doing. But we also have to understand that there may be a loyalty tax that if you keep an employee and we're not compensating them according to what the rest of the market is, they're going to pay that loyalty tax. They're going to get paid less potentially by staying on board. So compensation, whether it's in dollar amounts or what used to be called fringe benefits, is now pretty much expected compensation. If we're not looking at the full total labor load, the entire employee life cycle experience, we need to take all those into account when we're looking at how to not just attract but also retain our best talent.
Good point. Good point. And of course, there's the ever increasing benefits and insurance costs, which add additional strains to the budget. And I think what's important for people to remember is if you're a nonprofit or a small business where you don't have a lot of control over your revenue, especially if you're depending on grants, grants don't necessarily give you a COLA every year when you reapply. So your funding often remains flat despite the fact that the cost of doing business goes up, further straining our nonprofit and small businesses. So trends impacting the actual workplace, right? So here we're going to talk about the shifting expectations, right? And this is certainly has been a long-term trend, but was exacerbated by the pandemic, right? So employees are looking now for a sense of purpose. If they're going to spend all this time working, they want to make sure that it's meaningful work. Employees are now looking for more of a life-work balance. Less work and more life is what they want. And employees may take a lower wage, as Dustin mentioned, if they were offered more flexibility to work from home.
I think as you're looking at your organization specifically, there's so much data out there, and I think sometimes it becomes overwhelming. So, I call this kind of like the study controversy, right? If I look at two different studies, I'm going to get different numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the one that directly fits maybe my halo effect, maybe kind of where I feel like the organization is or should go. So again, the numbers, and I think a lot of the data that we're putting out here, again, we try to find not the extremes, but we try to find what is making sense with the trend, right? So, and again, there's a study done last year by the Global Workplace Analytics, but again, they did a study last year, and I love it because even within individual studies, sometimes there's conflicting data in there, right? So this, again, I love this. I really do love this study. So I'm not throwing shade on it, but they found that for those employees that can work remote or at least maybe hybrid, 35 to 40% increase in productivity and creativity versus their in-office counterparts. But in that same study, it also said that 59% of remote workers normally work past hours, right? So, they're doing work to 9 to 5. They take 10 to T-ball, and then they come back and they close out the night, call it, 9 to midnight. So they're overworking what would be normally seen as the normal work hours, more likely to lead to burnout. So again, as we're looking at a lot of these studies, yes, I may be more productive and more creative if I am remote or hybrid. But what's going to be the financial cost because my employees are now less engaged, they're reaching burnout. Now I have to replace the worker that is frankly leaving my organization because of burnout. So again, just when you're looking at these studies, again, make sure that we're looking at the trends, not the extremes, but also understand that your organization is going to be vastly different from the manufacturer next door, which would be vastly different from the law firm 2 doors down. So just take them with a grain of salt. So.
Yeah. So of course, the other trend impacting the workplace is this kind of demand for flexible work styles. I understand, and maybe Dustin, you can weigh in on this, but I also understand that, if we look at states that are employee centric, right, so that if there are lawsuits, the tendency is to side with the employee. And my understanding is New Jersey is the second most employee centric state. Mm-hmm. Only behind California?
Yeah, and there is a very heavy emphasis on protecting the employees' rights, which again, I love that. But as practitioners, as executives in organizations, again, going back to regulations, compliance challenges, this may mean that in order for you to ensure compliance and really transfer that liability off of you, you're going to need to make sure that we're compliant with all the different regulations, right? So looking at these, again, people want to work from home. They want to work from where they are most productive, most comfortable. And I think these numbers here, I think these kind of fall in line with the trend, right? That they want to be able to at least have the ability to work remote or hybrid. And going back to that Prudential study, again, a third of job switchers in the past 2 years took a pay cut to have more flexibility. And I think that says a lot about the workforce today.
Yeah, agreed. And there's some other reasons that flexibility has kind of been a #1 demand of employees. The obvious, right, a better work-life balance. But also we're seeing that employees are realizing that they could have reduced childcare costs if they work from home. And childcare costs has always been just a huge issue for folks. In fact, we're seeing a reduction in the need for childcare centers because so many people have figured out how to work and care for their children. I can tell you from personal experience when my children were young, and it was many, many years ago, working from home was not an option. And I would, in the summer, I would have to put my children in childcare for the summer, and I would work. My entire salary would go to childcare, so that in the fall I still had a job, right? So, childcare cost definitely comes up, and then, just the very practical, especially with the rising costs of gas and cars and repair. Reduced commuting time and cost is also very attractive to employees when they talk about working from home. The other thing we know is that there's a fair amount of stress and burnout, right? So, and it's still increasing after the height of the pandemic and all of the other kind of collateral damage that occurred. Gen Z and millennials have the highest rates of burnout, which leads to lower morale, less engagement, increased errors at work, increased probability of resignation, and poor communication. And I'm going to take a little detour here. I last minute found some research about so we have 4 generations right now in the workforce. We have our baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And I found a piece of information about what each of these generations wants from their work and their workplace. So very quickly, the baby boomers want a loyal employer, the chance to mentor others, and respect. Our Gen X's want a trustworthy employer, problem-solving opportunities, and autonomy. Our millennials want an empathetic employer, meaningful work, and flexibility. And our Gen Z folks want a culturally competent employer, competitive wages, and stability. And so you really need to know who your employees are and try to manage all of these demands from all of these different generations to keep your employees engaged. Additional trends in the workplace, obviously pressures of economic uncertainty. 72% of all employees are noting that they're feeling stressed about their finances. And I can tell you that when you have to pay $7 for eggs, right? It just starts to add up. And listen, if I could buy a couple chickens and put them in my backyard, I would. We're looking to our leadership to confirm job security and fair pay, right?
Yeah, and I think that last bullet there, that the transparency regarding compensation. I think we talked a little bit about it, but if I go back to the SEC, November of 2021 is when they passed the legislation regarding public companies reporting human capital management kind of measures and everything. So, and metrics. So the good thing is right now that's for publicly traded companies, right? So if you got a New York Stock Exchange ticker, this probably applies to you. But what I would say is it may not apply to you right now. But if I look at the market as a whole, if my competition, so to speak, is doing it and I'm not, it kind of puts me at the deficit, right? So going back to not just putting your minimum and maximum salary and benefits on pay, on compensation when you're putting out those job postings. What I would say right now, because there's no direct regulation that may affect you, this is a chance to really tell a story, right? So what I would say is it may be coming down where it may be law, but at this point now it may not directly affect you. But so use this as a time where you can tell a story, right? Tell about why you're paying this much and that much in compensation. Tell them why you're offering benefits and why you're doing this because of the great mission you guys have directly impacting your communities. And I think that's kind of where you can use this as really as a way to leverage your services and how you guys are directly impacting the world. So yes, it's going to be coming down the pipe, I think, but right now use this to your advantage, I would say.
So all of this to say, it sounds like doom and gloom, but all of this to say that all of these factors, all of these trends can affect the level of engagement with your employees. And that's really what we want to talk about today. Why is engagement important. So according to People Element, they did a survey in 2023. Organizations that have increased their percentage of engaged employees, they have a workplace culture that has transformed in a positive direction, and they have improved growth outcomes and efficiencies. And that's really the bottom line. You want to have an organization that is on a growth trajectory and that you're running an effective and efficient business, whether you're a small, medium-sized business or a nonprofit.
Yeah, so again, I do apologize. I nerd out about this stuff. So I'm a data junkie by heart. So again, I apologize. But
you're among friends.
Yeah. But you know, when I look at just the engagement piece, you know, and Lauren, you and I have talked about this before, but you know, I feel like we measure as a nation the unemployed versus employed, right? That every month we get those reports. What we don't measure is the engaged versus the unengaged, right? So when I look at the ROI for an engaged employee, the Corporate Leadership Council did a study last year, 50,000 employees. This was, I think about 75% of those were here in the States, about 25% were international. But what they found was that those companies who have an engaged workforce grow their profits 3 times faster. Now, again, this is looking at a lot of different market segments. So this is manufacturing, this is tech, this is nonprofit, yes. But when I look at your organization, you know, if I look at your business, the more engaged your employees are, the more that you're going to be able to attract grants and donations, right? The highly engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave the organization. Deloitte study last year, 93% of employees said that if there's a sense of belonging, that directly impacts a positive organizational performance. So I think when you look at the engagement piece, there definitely is an ROI. And I think this is, again, this is where we can paint that picture of success to go out there and get those grants, right? And Lauren, one of your other points there is incorporating that DEIB, right? Incorporating that belonging piece. And this is how I think nonprofits have to work in today's market, going out there and attracting grants. You have to show them that you're doing this, right? Now, Josh Bersin Academy put out another study last year talking about resilient companies. I'd have to say there's probably been a couple of events lately that have led to resilience in the workforce, right? Maybe shutting down the whole world for a pandemic. But, you know, for those companies that are resilient, you know, almost 4 times more likely to meet and exceed their financial targets than the competition, more likely to satisfy, retain their clients. Now, again, this is for industries kind of agnostic, but think about this as 4 times more likely to retain donors, retain grants, 4.5 times more likely to outperform their competition. Again, maybe we'll say there's not competition in the nonprofit space, but we're competing for dollars, right? We're competing for market space, right? Almost 7 times more likely to engage and retain their workforce. So again, the more we could focus on driving that engagement piece with your employees, with your donors, just so much better. And there really is a mathematical financial ROI for engagement. And then, yeah, then I think as we look at the impact of disengaged employees, you know, I think when we look at this, you know, some studies will say about 10 to, you know, I've seen studies down to 10% or 20% is the cost of a disengaged employee. And really what that looks like, if I'm paying somebody $100,000 for easy math and they're disengaged, that's going to cost me as an organization $10,000 to $20,000 in lost productivity. At the national scale, about $500 to $600 billion lost in productivity due to disengaged employees. Now, a disengaged employee will produce less, they'll be less effective, more likely to leave. So what's the cost of actually replacing an employee, right? Again, these studies will range from 1 times their salary, 50% of their hourly salary, whatever it might be, up to 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, depending on what C-level suite. Now that cost really only takes into account the cost of hiring, training, onboarding and supervising a new employee. What it does not take into account is the Rolodex of, you know, relationships and partnerships that employee who left takes with them. right? So if I have a 20-year employee, if they leave, I'm losing 20 years of connections and partnerships, right? Disengaged employees are more likely to make errors, you know, and I think this has kind of really led to what we've heard in the past year, and that is the rise of quiet quitting, right? So if I'm disengaged, I'm going to check the box, I'm going to do my work, and whether I get done at 10, I'm going to check out and clock out at 4 p.m. You know, that's kind of lost hours, lost productivity. So this is the impact and the negative ROI, so to speak, of a disengaged workforce.
So when we talk about employees that are engaged, especially in the nonprofit sector, and we know that the burnout rate is very high. This is hard work. And so we look at the drivers in terms of the best nonprofits to work with. What are their employees saying? And if you look at this slide, you can see it is about engagement. It is about belonging. You know, it's not about just being a number, right? But in this list of top 10 things, none of it is about salary. None of it is about my compensation. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that, but I am saying that there are many other things that we can give our employees to help them be engaged and to continue the great work that they're doing. So I just found this was a really interesting chart. So there's a couple of ways that we can talk about increasing our employee engagement, right? Certainly we want to have a process to support our employees' growth and development. And again, this does not have to cost a lot of money, right? But giving opportunities for new challenges, for problem solving, for joining committees, right? Just supporting growth and development. Ongoing communication from leadership is a key way to keep your employees engaged. Believe it or not, the employees want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? They want to hear it all. They want to know what's going on in your company, in your nonprofit, and the only person that can tell them that is the leadership. Employees want to feel valued, and there are lots of little things you can do. Again, don't cost a lot of money, but you can value your employees. You know, a simple lunch for employee appreciation, really easy, and goes a long way. Making sure that your employees have a voice and that you engage in employee engagement surveys, and we're going to actually talk in detail about that in a few minutes. And then trying to provide for that work-life balance that our employees are really looking for.
Yeah, I think that last bullet there, the ROI, return on investment for a mentor. You know, going back to shifting culture and driving culture and engagement within your workforce, I really feel like culture is really created and driven at that job posting, and then continues through the first, second, third rounds of interviews, or however many you do there. And then it kind of flows through that first week, right? And what I call like day zero, like, right, you know, before that new employee comes on, you know, yes, the I-9, the W-4, all that kind of stuff, the admin work that they have to do, but have we actually named somebody that is going to, you know, kind of walk them around in their shadow, right? I mean, who's going to grab them and make sure that they are actually taken care of, right? And where are you going for that first day lunch, right? That's a big deal. And so CNBC study last year said that 91% of workers who have a mentor, right, that's someone that by name that they know, and there's a point of contact on day one that they show up, that they're satisfied with the job, that they have a mentor. And 57% said that they are very satisfied with their job if they have a mentor. And conversely, about 40% who did not have a mentor in this study said that they considered quitting their jobs in the first 3 months. So now we've lost an employee who has 20 years of experience and a huge Rolodex of connections. We just hired this person, that cost money. And now they're going to leave in the first 3 months because we have not named a certain person to just help them get acquainted to the culture. And I think that is just a huge miss by organizations today. So.
Agreed, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about how do we kind of start to influence engagement and understanding the cause of disengagement in our employees. And I think that a really good way to start is to consider using an employee engagement survey. Certainly, it's not the only response to this challenge, but it is a kind of easy and cost-effective way to really get at the core issues. And oftentimes, when you do employee engagement surveys, the results are surprising, and you get to know your employees a little bit better and what they want. Certainly, the pros of a survey would be that it does give your employees a voice. Being responsive to the survey, right, and the results certainly promotes retention. People want to know what you're going to do with those survey results and how are you going to change your practices to meet the needs that your employees have voiced. It also sends a very positive message to your employees that your opinions are valued. And I think that the key here is, again, how you respond to the survey results and how you communicate that response. A few cons of surveys. If you're not ready to act on the information, if you don't see this as a call to action, then it could lead to some false expectations by your employees. So if you're going to ask questions of your employees and you're going to ask them to respond, you better be ready to provide feedback and also kind of action steps that you will take as a result of the survey. And this would absolutely lead to employee relations issues. They would actually become more disengaged than they already were. So a lot of organizations engage in employee satisfaction surveys, and there's a difference between a satisfaction survey and an engagement survey, right? So satisfaction surveys typically measure views, attitudes, and perceptions of the organization. It's also called, most recently, a climate survey, whereas an engagement survey really measures an employee's commitment, motivation, sense of purpose, and I'm going to add sense of belonging, which is a new kind of need for our employees. It also measures passion for their work and the organization and the mission, which again, in the nonprofit and small business sector, this is key to good employee relations. All right. So the next couple slides kind of get a little bit into the weeds of how to go about doing a engagement survey. So I'm going to kind of go through these kind of quickly. And because I think engagement surveys obviously have to reflect the individual organization. But here's just a few tips on how to get started. And certainly there are companies and consultants who will actually do an engagement survey for you. But you can also do it on your own. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll get similar results, right? So obviously timing and frequency is important. I would suggest an annual engagement survey so you can measure year over year how your actions based on the results of the survey have influenced the opinions and engagement of your employees. I think the design is you absolutely want to look year over year at trends. You want to agree on the objective of the goal of the survey before you administer it. You need to consider who should have inputs on the questions, right? So this can't just be the CEO saying, I'm going to design a survey, right? You need to talk to your key leaders, your key directors, and perhaps even your board, if you have board members that would have some expertise in this area. And also determine how those results will be communicated. Will it be a letter to your employees? Increasingly, organizations are actually using videos to relay messages to their employees. And I think that's a really great way to do it. It's very engaging. People can see you. It seems a lot more personal. Right. Do you agree?
Yeah, I love that idea because number one, it puts a face to the person asking. And I think the other thing too, I would say is, and we'll get a little bit more into design considerations, but also when you're developing the questions, I think sometimes having an outside source do or kind of lead those questions, because if I'm the CEO, how awesome am I? Am I awesome? Or am I like the awesomest? Like you want to make sure that it's kind of a third party that is not trying to skew the answers one way or the other.
And so then, of course, you want to also consider the impact. What areas do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on mission and vision, customer satisfaction, employee retention, or quality of life issues, or all of them? Just be careful, don't bite off more than you can chew. So some other design considerations, obviously you want to ensure that the survey is confidential. Certainly there are a lot of platforms out there, SurveyMonkey being one of the very popular ones. Make sure employees know. And in order to ensure that, don't ask for their name, obviously, or their position, or anything that would identify them. I think the information is more important than who's providing the information. You want to keep it short and simple, right? I've seen surveys that were like 50 questions long. No one has the time to take action on those surveys, and it becomes a burden for the employee, thinking that they have to sit down and answer 50 questions.
And the last 25 are trash because I want to get through it.
Right.
Like 30 minutes
Right.
already,
Or right, the employee just puts very satisfied or very unsatisfied down the line, right? So I don't know if you have an opinion, Dustin. In my work, I have really encouraged employers to keep it to 20 and sometimes just 10 questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number of questions isn't as important as the impact that you're looking for, right? So I could have a 5-question survey that is open-ended. Maybe even they're actually able to write in their own questions or their own answers, instead of a bullet point. So I would say try to find a mix. If it's 10 questions but 5 are open-ended where they type in, great. I think that 20 is great. I mean, I agree. I think if you go beyond 20, then that quickly becomes abracadabra, which I did in high school and failed my test. So yeah.
Exactly. You want to avoid asking questions that actually have 2 topics. It's very confusing. Well, which one am I responding to, right? So you don't want to ask a question about salary and benefits. Those are 2 different things. Involve a few key employees and do a test, a pilot of your survey, and get their opinion about the questions and the effectiveness of the survey. Use a scale. Now, Dustin and I were just debating this, right? How big should the scale be? Should it be 1 to 3 opportunities to respond, 1 to 5? Dustin said 7, 10.
Yeah, so I think anytime I'm looking, a scale from like 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, I love the 1 to 10, but the caveat is you cannot use 7. 7 is the most get over answer ever, because you're good either way, right? Like I don't hate it, but I don't love it, So it's the most non-committal number ever. So if you're going to use a 1 to 5 or if you're going to use 1 to 10, make it so like 7, it can't be an option, because it forces them to, I like this or I don't like this, and then reason why.
Right. Again, demographic questions should be optional or limited. Use neutral statements, right? So you don't want to infuse any emotionality to the questions. And again, making sure that the survey is confidential. I would also say from experience that you want to be careful about asking questions that, based on the response, you cannot address, right? Because that really does set up your employees to, again, be disappointed in management's response. So if you are absolutely not in the position to offer raises this particular year, don't ask questions about salary, right? You can ask questions about maybe benefits or, obviously satisfaction, but just be careful about asking questions that you can't address.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's a great point, right? Because it's the high school president, election, when they're going to promise the whole school 2-ply, toilet paper in the bathrooms. But I think at the other side too is you want to make sure that you run this by your HR team, and maybe your employer lawyer, or whatever it might be, just because what you don't want to do is you don't want to ask questions which then could open you up to further litigation, right? So if I'm asking questions about, well, how do you feel about work-life balance? But I want you to specifically tell me in this open block about how you're having trouble with childcare, whatever it might be. And so you want to just be careful that, have somebody else look at this to make sure that you're not going to get yourself in further trouble when you actually are really trying to help the situation. So,
good point. Excellent. So when you're rolling out the survey, right? I mean, the goal really is to have a high response rate. And I would say a high response rate would be 60 to 75%.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the difficulty is if I get 100% participation, what's the data look like, right? So if I get 60%, but it's quality, and I know that these are actually true and just answers, then I'd rather take 60% completion over 100% of trash.
Agreed. So make sure that your managers or directors or leadership are aware of the survey in advance so they can promote it. Certainly you want to explain the purpose of the survey. What are you going to do with this survey? It's not going to be data that's going to sit on your shelf and collect dust. Make sure your employees understand that there will actually be action steps based on this survey. You might want to think about kind of sending out a save the date so that employees know something's coming, and they can reserve a little bit of time to be thoughtful in their responses. Give a very limited amount of time to complete the survey. We know that when things like surveys come back or come out, employees are either going to respond right away or not respond, right? So you don't have to leave it open for 6 weeks. A reasonable amount of time, 3 or 4 weeks, would be sufficient. And then count down the time until survey results are due, meaning say to your employees, we will be revealing the survey results in 4 weeks or on this date.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial. I travel a lot with my job, and I get every time I stay at a hotel, I get the automated email saying, fill out this 5-part question, tell us how we did. I never fill them out because there's no in response, right? So your team and your organization will not fill out surveys if there's no expected call to action afterwards, right? So the day, the survey is going to be on Thursday, collect the data all through next week. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a collective meeting. Here's the steps. And so if there is an end state, if there is clear defined measures that after the results come out, this date, then this follow-up date, and then the third date, whatever, you're going to have a lot more success at getting not just participation, but quality participation.
Agreed. So when you get your survey results and you start to analyze the results, a couple things to remember. And like Dustin said, have your senior leaders and your human resources look at the analysis. They might have some interesting insight in terms of those results. You want to assess the reliability of the data, right? So oftentimes I will throw out the questions with very, very low response rates, right? So it just doesn't influence or unduly influence the results of the survey. And then also be thoughtful and intentional about how you're going to present the results. I like colorful graphs. I think a visual is a really great idea as opposed to a bunch of words and percentages. Right? So when you design your communication of your results, right, design something that's going to go to all employees at the same time. I think it's very dangerous to send separate letters and separate results to separate levels of the organization, right? That all that does is really strive the organization. Obviously, you want to thank your employees for taking the time to complete the survey. And also, provide information about the response rate. I think that's really important. I think employees want to know how many or the percentage of employees that responded. I remember I had a survey once and our response rate was very, very low. And so what my message to the employees was, here are the survey results. This is the response rate. I feel this is a low response rate, so I'm concerned about the validity of these results. And I actually put it out there that I was concerned, hoping that people understood that although we're gonna relay the results, I would really like more employees to participate so we get better results. You want to actually relay, again, the good, the bad, the ugly. So oftentimes I will work with organizations and say, okay, so your communication to your employees, be it a video or a letter, should say, based on the survey, we're doing these 3 things really, really well, right? But there are these 3 things that our employees have said we really need to improve upon. And then lay it out. These are the things we're going to do to address these 3 issues. Send a mid-year update. All right, it's been 6 months. These are the things we've accomplished towards those areas that our employees have outlined as challenging for the organization. And then prior to the next survey, give your final update on the results. Did you meet your goals and objectives from the last survey? If you didn't, why not, and what you're going to do about it? This really helps to build trust with your employees, and it helps to promote them using their voice and continuing to respond to your surveys.
So I think one thing that I think is really great here is, the mid-year updates and the updates along the way. When you're presenting these results, what I think is a great way, again, to drive engagement in your organization, this gives you a great opportunity to name some champions in your organization, right? So if there's a result where we're going to do, project X by Y date, it gives you a chance to kind of find that champion within your organization. Maybe give a low-level supervisor a chance to shine and take over a project. Now he has ownership, and then he or she has ownership of that project, and now this is more of a grassroots kind of result-based project you have versus this is coming from the C-suite in ivory tower.
Good point. Yep. A couple other things you can do beyond your annual survey to increase engagement.
Yeah. So I think what I really feel is like performance performance reviews. I think number one, I think we need to get away from the standard call it December performance review time period crunch, where the only time your employees know how they're doing is once a year, right? And it's almost a surprise. So what I feel like the best way to kind of go through these things is there's been a real shift from exit interviews as people leave your organization, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, to what we kind of call stay interviews, right? So going back to that new employee, they have the mentor, we're doing everything right there. They stayed 3 months. Let's check in with Doug and see how he's doing, right? And then let's check in with Sally at 6 months and see how she's doing too, right? So do those new employee surveys. Is this exactly according to the job description interview process, right? Give me feedback, right? And then with your other seasoned employees, maybe do some stay interviews. Like, why are you staying here at this organization? Like, why haven't you left? I mean, ask those tough conversations, and you're going to find out a lot, right? So now these stay interviews are a way to drive further engagement, help you attract and retain your talent. But we need to get away from those exit interviews more towards the stay interviews. I'm not saying don't do exit interviews, you still do them, but there needs to be a shift into those stay interviews and those new employee surveys. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, especially the 3 and 6 month new employee surveys is a great way to help your new employees build a relationship with your organization, because especially if it's coming from the HR department, your employees now have an advocate, right, to help them, and are more likely to come and work with your HR department if there's an issue than just quiet quitting.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. A couple other ways to improve your employee engagement for little or no cost, right?
Important.
So improve your efficiencies in the workplace, right? So when you can, invest in technology that will streamline some of your processes. Ongoing communication with your employees, especially from the leadership. Engage in recognition programs, make them fun and engagement. Focus on your employees' well-being. Have a walking program or something that helps employees see that there's a benefit to staying healthy and well and happy, and you can also work too. Connect your employees with jobs that they care about. So if you have an employee who doesn't really perform well, ask them, is there another job within this organization that you would be excited to try, and see if you can be flexible enough to steer them in that direction. And also ask employees for input on company events, right? What do you want to have happen, right?
Yeah, the last two bullets here, again, these are questions I get asked quite often from our clients. Now we're looking to not just improve employee engagement, but also get them back in the office, right? So, I think all these things right here can be ways to attract people to come back to the office. And sorry for acronyms, I spent 10 years in the Army, so I stuck with it sometimes, but SME, SME, or subject matter expert training, right? So can I bring somebody from the outside to provide this excellent training to my team as a way to, yes, attract them back to the workplace, but also to build that engagement? Can I bring in an ecosystem or a sphere of influence person who could help bring context, help expand my knowledge in my kind of workspace? Can I bring them in for some training? But also, I think a lot of times employees just want to, like, we won't say it outright because it's weird, but we want one-on-one time with our leadership, right? We want to know, going back to the 10 reasons why I stay there, they feel valued, right? Because they want to know, how can I progress in my career? What's the next step? Where should I be focusing on? Who can I connect with that'll help me progress, whether it's through certifications and trainings external to the company, or maybe it's just an external, wizard and guru who can really put you in the right direction. So I think that one-on-one time with leadership is so vital, regardless of what level they're at.
Great. Okay, so in conclusion, right, we all know these are unprecedented times, certainly from an economic standpoint, and organizations must shift their operations and start to meet the expectations of their employees. It makes for a better company culture, and happy employees are productive employees. Consider your employees partners in your mission, right? Make sure you're listening to their voice. Oftentimes, the employees are the ones that are on the ground doing the hard work. And so make sure you understand kind of the challenges that they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. I think you want to work to understand the root causes of disengaged employees. Because remember, if you have a disengaged employee, it's very easy for that employee to start to create kind of negative attitudes with your other employees. And certainly develop strategies to increase engagement and increase retention, which will ultimately save resources, precious dollars, and make for a more effective organization. Okay, so thank you for joining us on this webinar. I hope that you walk away with some information or some tidbits on how to start to influence engagement in your organization, and ultimately make for a better workplace for your employees and reduce costs of turnover. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Both Dustin and my contact information is right here on the screen.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Again, I try to be active on LinkedIn as well, so I've been struggling there lately, but just with travel. But I really just want to say thank you for all the work you guys are doing. I think Laura and I were talking before this, and man, just what a vital role you guys play in our communities. So thank you for all the hard work and great things you guys are doing, not just locally, but across the country. So thank you for everything you guys are doing. I can't say it humbly enough.
Okay, thank you.